Think gadget reviews, news, and all about it.
BlackBerry Priv review. While the Z10, Q10 and Massive Passport were all solid efforts, their lack of apps meant that they barely made a splash in the gigantic ocean dominated by Apple and Android devices. Enter the oddly named Private. Not only is this BlackBerry's very first handset running Android, it's also got all the specs you'd expect to see in a modern flagship. This phone matches everything the Samsungs, LGs and Apples of the world have to offer, on paper at least. At £560, it's more expensive than a lot of these handsets too. And then, of course, there's its slide-out physical keyboard, a form factor that hasn't been popular since the mid-2000s. It's a unique handset, to say the least, and arguably BlackBerry's last chance to begin clawing back the land its mighty empire once strutted over with unwavering confidence. A handsome blend. At first glance, the Priv is an unassuming but smart-looking handset, thanks to its sharp edges, which are offset by the smooth curves of its wraparound display. Stare a little longer, and you'll spot small details. The microSD slot for expandable memory. The side-mounted media controls. The front-facing bottom speaker bar. The metal strips that accent the screen. And of course, the BlackBerry logo, which will probably earn you a slew of curious smirks these days. The rear of the handset isn't slathered in traditionally premium materials like glass or metal. Instead, BlackBerry has stuck with the same carbon weave rear it previously used on the Q10. It doesn't feel as premium as glass or metal, but it is pleasant to the touch and offers lots of grip, far more than the slippery glass of the Galaxy S6. This extra grip is welcomed, as the Priv's 5.4-inch screen means that smaller-handed users might struggle with one hand. The build quality of the handset itself is solid, but it's quite easy to make it creak by pressing down firmly on the back, where there's a slight internal gap between the panel and the battery, a disappointment at this price point. It's not a major flaw by any means, but it's not something you'll be able to replicate with the iPhone 6s or Galaxy S6. What year is it? When was the last time you held a slider phone in your hand? For me, it was around 2009, when I waved goodbye to my trusty Nokia N95 and migrated to the stunning HTC HD2. The Priv shares a physical keyboard with these mobile relics, but the handset itself is slim enough that it's well disguised. The entire screen slides up with a gentle push of a metal lip that rests just above the bottom speakers. I must admit, I've had some fun handing the Priv over to family and friends, before revealing the keyboard with a quick flick, and seeing their reaction. The first response from all of them, of course, was why? It's a fair question. Touchscreen keyboards are perfectly suited to modern smartphones, and occasional autocorrect errors aside, I don't think many of us have been screaming out for a physical keyboard. You could argue that BlackBerry simply included the keyboard as a way to differentiate the Priv from the competition. It took a few days for me to get used to it, but I can happily report that BlackBerry has once again delivered a great physical keyboard. Ironically, the Priv's default on-screen keyboard works brilliantly. So much so that I've actually used its physical keyboard less than I'd expected. What's so great about the software keyboard? Well, it lets you flick up predictions as you type, learns which words you use, and even tracks where your fingers tend to land, adjusting the sweet spot for each individual letter, resulting in less mistakes. If BlackBerry sold its keyboard on the Google Play Store, it could make a chunk of well-deserved cash. I have found myself using the physical keyboard for longer emails and notes, however. With it, you have the benefit of on-screen numbers, making for a faster typing experience than when I'm using a virtual keyboard alone. The physical keyboard has another benefit too. Like the Passport before it, it doubles up as a trackpad, letting you scroll through home screens, web pages, and books, by swiping your fingers across the keys. You can also flick up on the keys to insert predictions, and swipe back across them to delete words. It's not a must-have feature, but it's another little thing that makes the Priv stand out, and I found myself using it a lot while scrolling through Reddit and reading books. Superb screen. The Samsung Galaxy S6's screen is the best smartphone display I've ever seen. Its 2K resolution is razor sharp, true blacks give it excellent contrast, and to top it all off, it has deliciously vibrant colors. The fact that I spent a solid 5 minutes staring at identical side-by-side pictures on both the Priv and S6 then, is testament to how good the Priv's display is. It matches the S6's impressive brightness and resolution, and despite having a slightly lower pixel count, 540 as opposed to the S6's 577, there's no noticeable difference in sharpness and clarity, even with eye-to-screen levels of scrutiny. An AMOLED panel also means that the Priv is one of the few major flagships that can match the S6's true black levels. Not only that, but whites on the Priv are ever so slightly purer. Not by a massive amount, mind, but when you spend 5 minutes straight staring at two screens, it's the sort of thing you notice. The S6's screen still serves up more vibrant colors, even when the Priv's saturation levels are maxed out. This doesn't necessarily mean that the S6's display is better though. Personally, I prefer the slightly more natural colors of the Priv's display, although the S6's vibrancy does have the effect of artificially nudging its contrast against the blacks up a bit, which can give Samsung's handset the effect of appearing ever so slightly sharper in some cases. Either way, the Priv's display happily holds its own against the best screen the smartphone world has seen so far. The curved edges of the Priv's screen aren't as prominent as those found on the S6 Edge and Edge Plus, and they shouldn't distract you during normal usage, at least from what I've seen so far. The curves seem to be there for aesthetic purposes more than anything, and they fulfill that role well. A surprisingly good camera. The Priv has, without a doubt, the best camera of any BlackBerry smartphone in history. Given the past performance of the company's cameras though, that's not exactly a surprise. It's an 18MP affair, with optical image stabilization, OIS, and I took no mercy on it, pitting it directly against one of the best smartphone cameras in the world right now, the one gracing the rear of the Galaxy S6. While the Priv can't match the S6's imaging prowess, it turns out, but it's still a very capable camera that delivers results in almost any situation you throw at it. The S6 Edge is ahead for detail and sharpness in well-lit conditions, despite its smaller megapixel count, and the same goes for HDR mode too. The Priv's HDR setting is almost too good, in fact, lighting up darker areas to such an extent that the lack of contrast can make pictures seem a little flat in comparison. Macro performance is equally good on both phones, which were able to pick up the pores in a Tangerine or Satsuma. I can't tell the difference, with minimal fuss. The S6 wins this round too though, because its depth of field effect is far greater. While the Priv's close-up shots do blur the background slightly, it's nowhere near as prominent as the S6's. In almost pitch-black conditions, the handsets are roughly equal, although the S6's auto mode does a better job of picking up detail. As long as you remember to bump up the exposure on the Priv, which requires a simple swipe across the screen, it'll deliver okay results. Almost any handset, minus the LG G4, has lost in a camera head-to-head against the Galaxy S6. The Priv's camera is surprisingly good, and will serve you well, as long as you're happy with the camera app's bare-bones approach. If smartphone photography is extremely important to you though, the Galaxy S6 or LG G4, with their professional manual modes which offer tons of options, will be the better choice for you. Oh, and if you like selfies, prepare for disappointment. The Priv's paltry 2MP front-facing camera won't be able to compete with most other smartphones. Personally, that's very low on my list of priorities, but there you go. The Priv is running Android 5.1.1 Lollipop, which means that Marshmallow will follow in a future update. What the Priv does bring to the table is a vast list of extremely useful software and security enhancements, more so than any other Android phone I've used. There are so many, in fact, it's difficult to know where to start. The home screen is as good a place as any, I suppose. Swiping up on any app icon that supports widgets, marked by 3 small dots, will bring up a pop-up widget. Instead of the Google Play Music widget cluttering up the screen, for example, a simple swipe up shows the controls and album art, before it's swept away again. If you're like me, and prefer a widget-free home screen for a cleaner look, this is a fantastic, refreshing idea, and it's something that I want Google to bake into stock Android immediately. Swiping up from the bottom of the screen calls up Google Now, which is a gesture Android fans will be familiar with. It also throws up 2 customizable shortcuts, which I found useful for accessing the BlackBerry Hub and the camera.